I wanted to make this video for those people who consider themselves Muslims and struggle with substance abuse and gambling and so on. I wanted to explain what God says about these things, and I also wanted to talk a little bit about what addiction is. Anybody can become addicted. Anybody. If we don't listen to God to begin with, and we try these substances, we try gambling, any of us can fall into addiction. Period. So what is addiction? Addiction is confused with dependence a lot of times. What heroin addicts experience after they stop using heroin, the body aches, the diarrhea, the nausea, the vomiting, the insomnia, and so on, that is dependence. That is an addiction. Now, addiction always goes hand in hand with dependence. If you are dependent on somebody, on something, you're also addicted to it. What addiction is the desire to continue to use a substance, whether it's harmful to you or not, to continue to use these intoxicants and to not being able to stop when you want to. That is an addiction. So anytime you try a substance and you like it, whether you're dependent on it or not, if you crave it every day, if you make it a center point of your life, you're addicted to it. So the only sure way never to be addicted to anything is not to try any of these substances. Unfortunately, most of us never listen to that advice or are not taught this as a part of Islam. And so we make that mistake, and then for the rest of your life, you will struggle with addiction. Whether you use the substance or not, you're probably going to get cravings for the rest of your life. That being said, what does God say in the Quran about intoxicants and gambling? In chapter 5, verses 90 to 92, God says, "O you who believe, intoxicants and gambling and altar setup and dividing by arrows are abominations of the devil. Avoid them, therefore, that you may be successful." The devil is only trying to introduce hatred and animosity among you by means of intoxicants and gambling, and to keep you away from prayer and to cause you to forget about God. Will you not then stop? This is what God says. This is it. There's one more verse in chapter 2 which says, they ask you about intoxicants and gambling. Tell them in it there is usefulness for people, but their harm is far greater. Their sin is far greater than their usefulness. Okay, so yes, there is a place for morphine and things like that. They do help with pain. So, that's what it's meant by that. But that's it. That is the only thing about what God says about intoxicants and gambling in the Quran. It says that they are abominations of the devil. So if you do these things, you are following the devil. And it tells you exactly what the devil is trying to you do to you by it. To keep you away from prayer, to cause you to forget about God, and to introduce hatred and animosity among you. So when you look at it that way, you can see that it is exactly the opposite purpose of prayer. It is the counterweight to prayer. It is the mirror image of prayer. Intoxicants and gambling are. Whatever prayer is trying to achieve, whatever God tells you to achieve through prayer, God also tells you that intoxicants and gambling are against it. So when you think about what does God say is the purpose of prayer, and in chapter 20, verse 14, where God talks to Moses, he says, "Surely I am God. There is no God but I. Therefore serve me and keep up prayer for my remembrance." And also in chapter 29, verse 45, God says, "And recite that which has been revealed to you from your Lord, and recite that which has been revealed to you of the book, and keep up prayer. Surely prayer keeps away from indecency and evil. And remembrance of God is greatest, and God knows what you do." So that is the purpose of prayer, remembrance of God. And what did God tell us in chapter 5? What is the devil trying to do to us by means of intoxicants and gambling? To keep us away from prayer and from remembrance of God. Because prayer is a tool, because prayer is a weapon against the devil came up with a plan to keep us away from it through intoxicants and gambling. And God says in chapter 4, verse 43, "O you who believe, do not go near prayer when you are intoxicated until you know what you are saying." So you cannot pray intoxicated, therefore you cannot remember God. Therefore, if you don't remember God, God tells you what's going to happen. In chapter 43, verses 36 through 37, God says, "And whoever turns himself from the remembrance of the most merciful, we appoint for him a shaitan, a devil, so he becomes his companion. And most surely they turned him away from the path, but they think they are rightly guided." So if you turn away from prayer, you get this devil attached to you who keeps telling you that you're doing fine. If you're not praying, you think you're doing fine. And then one day comes and you die and you realize you weren't doing fine. This is how these two things are connected. If you want to stop doing drugs, if you want to stay away from doing drugs, and you consider yourself a Muslim, you have to listen to God. Prayer is everything. You have to pray. If you are a Muslim, drugs or not, you have to pray. And if you pray, it will help you quit, and it will keep you away from trying them, because you cannot pray high. You have to make prayer the most important thing in your life, as God says in the Quran. Without prayer, there is no Muslim. You can consider yourself to be whatever you want. You can think that you're a helicopter, but you are not. The same way, you can think you're a Muslim, but unless you pray, you are not. You do not fit the criteria. So, I wanted to end with this verse. God says in the Quran, verse 152 to 153, "Therefore remember me, and I will remember you, and be grateful to me, and do not be ungrateful. All you who believe, seek help through patience and prayer. Surely God is with the patient." Getting out from addiction is probably the most difficult thing that a person can do. Once you screw up like that, it can be very, very, very difficult to get your life back in order. Patience, every time you fail, you have to not give up. So you have to stay patient. And then just ask God for help. Remember God. Prayer, 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 prayer. That is your only weapon. Prayer keeps away from indecency and evil, and remembrance of God is greatest. That is what God tells us. We should listen. That's it. I'm going to keep this video short, but prayer and intoxicants are definitely related, and you have to understand this so you can avoid one and embrace the other. Good luck.